what is often missing in the understanding of ergonomics to human factors is that it is a design profession. It's using design to innovate, to cultivate design thinking in an organization. Safety or injury risk reduction might be a design objective, but it's one of many. It might be productivity, it might be sustainability, it could be about social engagement. Go through the list of things that you want to achieve in an organization, and safety is only one aspect.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. When you walk into an airport, the vast check-in area has high ceilings and open space. But as you file through security and find your gate, the ceilings get lower and the walls start closing in. What most of us see as coincidental is actually an intentional design construct that aims to mentally prepare passengers to enter the small, confined space of an airplane. Done right, it can help to avoid panic attacks and feeling trapped. Done wrong, you could have a plane full of claustrophobic and panicking passengers. The discipline of ergonomics might make you think of just picking the right desk and chair, but it's a much broader discipline than that, and it's been around a long time. It's about the design of the physical, the cognitive, and the organizational structures of work. Yes, to improve productivity, but also to keep workers safe and happy. In the hands of Dr. Sara Pazell, ergonomics includes the design of the self-perfecting systems that will continuously improve work design long after the designer has left. Sara is the managing director and principal consultant for Viva Health at Work. At Viva, she helps companies find solutions for human factors design and ergonomics across industries like mining, transportation, healthcare, retail, finance, food, and beverage, sports and fitness, and government organizations. In this episode, Sara and I talk about the real job of a work design strategist and how to engage employees and contextualize design for success. We also discuss why companies should consider psychosocial factors in design, the 7 principles of human-centered organization per ISO standards, the best and worst ways to generate new ideas, and other topics. Okay, if you enjoy this episode, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And now, my conversation with Dr. Sara Pazell. Sara Pazell, welcome to Work for Humans.
Thank you, Dart. I'm excited.
When I first came across your work, I came across something I had really not run into before. And so I have never looked into ergonomics. And I've never looked into the human-centered design aspects of ergonomics. And so when I first started reading your work, I ran into a whole vocabulary, like this gigantic vocabulary that's been built out around ergonomics. And I could see that you were taking ergonomics to a completely new place, that you were pushing to really revolutionize what ergonomics and human-centered workplace design would be. And I want to get into that today. But before we talk about that, I think we need to lay a foundation of the discipline. And I promise, along the way, there's a lot of times where I'm going to say, what does that word mean? Because you have a very deep vocabulary that I don't necessarily understand.
Fantastic. Thanks. I appreciate it.
What is the history and the background of your discipline? Where does it come from? And then we'll get to where is it going.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I can't take credit for revolutionizing the amazing impact that human factors and ergonomics can have. I just like to draw connections, and I see connections all the time, this web of connections. So essentially, human factors and ergonomics has always been about performance, and there are a lot of parallels, I believe, in our perspectives, Dart. It just might not have been the ontology or the framework that you were consciously acknowledging at the time. But I hear a lot from your work about designing for performance, recognizing the human experience, optimizing that experience, and seeing the value of that human experience and how it can actually mobilize business objectives, but also meet some social sustainability values or environmental sustainability values, whatever that might be. So ergonomics and human factors is about understanding the evolution of humans, how our hand grip works, our lateral pincer, palmar overhand grasp, a gross grasp, whatever that is, cylindrical grasp as one example, how our visual system works, the fact that when we look at close text, we actually view that down low. And when we have our wide view peripheral vision, that's a little bit broader. And that sounds simple, but things like the entire way that your design of your vehicle is made, for example, all of the information that you really need to focus on is down low at your dash, and peripherally is your windscreen, so you can see the rest of the world speeding by at a different level. So it informs design if we understand the evolution of humans and also the psychology of humans. Then we expand that into the ecology of humans. So how humans work in a social system and in environments and in a work system, the evolution and ecology of humans. That's understanding humans to inform design so that whatever your objective is, it's far more effective, but also how design might influence the behaviors of humans, that two-way street. And it's never-ending learning. It just never stops. It excites me because there's so much out there.
If I think back to what I think of as the roots of ergonomics, I think of people on the factory floor doing repetitive motions and setting it up in a way that they don't get injured was part of it. And I don't know if that's where it started, but don't get injured and can do it effectively. Is that the beginning of it?
Well, you certainly had a strong influence in the 1950s of looking at production lines. There was strong influence about ergonomics, and ergonomics, particularly in the US, tends to have a very physical basis of understanding that time and motion and repetitive motions. And there was concern at that time about too much standing work, so that there were varicose veins and other ill health, cardiovascular, respiratory issues arising. That got a lot of impetus and awareness, but you're going to find that there were aspects of human-centered design awareness right back from early 1850s, for example, or late 1800s. But when you're talking about in the factory environment, certainly talk to productivity. And anytime you have humans involved in a system, we certainly can't negate the effect of humans on our work or the effect of design on humans. And yes, that got a lot of attention. And I think now I guess what I call Google ergonomics is just the quick view of ergonomics being about sitting up straight and using your mouse and using your workstation. And that is so little about what ergonomics is. You may find the terms human factors and ergonomics used interchangeably, not systematically by all people. Human factors oftentimes tends to be relegated to those who think about the psychology of humans. But traditionally, human factors and ergonomics are interchangeable terms. It's understanding how work should be designed for the humans that are in that system, and physical, cognitive, psychosocial, environmental impacts must be considered. Those are those domains of ergonomics that we talk about. So there's things like the International Ergonomics Association that will have that information. You have some great information in the US from HFES, Human Factors Ergonomics Society. In Australia, add the A. And in the UK, Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors. So you can see they just throw the two terms together, ergonomics and human factors. But I think what also is often missing in the understanding of ergonomics and human factors is that it is a design profession. You mentioned earlier about this being linked to injury risk reduction, and certainly safety or injury risk reduction might be a design objective. But in my worldview, it's so much more. It's also about innovation, not just design for prevention or prevention through design. It's using design to innovate, to cultivate design thinking in an organization, to engage people so that they have some sense of agency and purchase in their work, that they design meaningful work, that they become architects of superior design, even more than co-design, because you have to have somebody with some really cogent design experience, but you're facilitating and engaging them in that design process and treating them respectfully as subject matter experts as they are. And in Australia, yes, that fulfills the safety obligation. That safety obligation is to consult with workers or discharge your obligation. as a duty holder in work health safety legislation to consult workers. So when somebody says to me, "Are you a safety professional?" I say no. And they look at me and go, "What?" I go, "Safety might be a design objective, but it's one of many. It might be productivity, it might be sustainability, it could be about social engagement, it might be go through the list of things that you want to achieve in an organization. And safety is only one aspect. It's an important aspect, but it's only one aspect. And there are safety professionals that are expert at what they do, and I rely on working with those teams."
You're describing a discipline that is much larger than I thought it was. And also, you're pointing out to me, I think of a lot of design thinking principles as emerging from the Stanford D School when it was formed. And that was maybe, 20 years ago. But human factors as a discipline I know goes way back. I know people who are working on human factors in the 40s.
Yes, there you go.
So it may be that design thinking got packaged by places like the Stanford D School, but the design part of it does go way back.
I think we just haven't done a very good at articulating the impact and the value proposition of human factors ergonomics in traditional and conventional design circles. I know I spent some time in Australia trying to get our profession recognized with the Professional Association Design Institute, and I had to go through several layers to demonstrate and pull up some academic papers and some case examples to show why we should be recognized in that circle of professions as members in that organization. And it got approved. It took some time, though. It just wasn't common or in their vernacular, if you will, to recognize human factors ergonomics as part of the design team, design professional.
It's funny, sometimes words get out of fashion, phrases get out of fashion. Cybernetics is out of fashion, but systems thinking is in fashion. But the truth is, those are very similar things.
Yes. Yeah. So human factors and ergonomics is very much a systems in design kind of thinking model. Absolutely.
And so you quoted in one of your papers a whole range of ISO guidelines. And I didn't know that ISO guidelines covered some of these principles. So for people who don't know, ISO is an international standards organization. And they certified companies basically saying that you are following these guidelines. And so the ISO that I used to work with, it was largely about, is your company behaving in a way that is going to be financially sustainable or culturally sustainable? That's a lot of the ISO that I've worked on. And I can't remember what the number of that ISO was. But ISO 27500 is the human-centered organization, and I'm reading from one of your papers. This establishes high-level principles to guide executive teams in the objectives that will optimize performance, minimize risks, maximize well-being, and enhance customer relationships.
That's pretty good, isn't it?
It really is. And there's a section on guidance for managers, and there's a section of it on the design of work systems. So I didn't know that existed. How old are those ISO standards? It looks like they're from 2016. I can sort of tell.
Yeah, so the human-centered organization, the one that's for managers, developed a couple years later. I think it's 2019, and 2016 was the original human-centered organization. Like, what is it? Who's it good for? What does it do? And what happens when you don't have it, which can be those aspects of catastrophes and financial loss that you talk about, disablement and fatalities, et cetera. What happens when you don't have it? Well, really bad stuff can happen if you're not really considerate of all the humans that are in a system. And all the good stuff is usability and service design, satisfaction for customers. But I think I've heard you use this, Dart, and I say this often too, our internal customers, our employees matter a great deal. And I often see that missing, that internal evaluation of the people that we're satisfying who actually are asked to advance our missions. And some great aspects of innovation. If you say that you want to be innovative, how are you doing it? Or if you say that you are an organization who has some very strong inclusivity policies, well, how are you designing for diversity is what I ask often. They have an inclusivity policy that's just sitting there collecting dust, many, many layers, a lot of thinking, a lot of brain power went into that. But how are you actualizing that? And so the next step I say is, what's your architectural plan to design for diversity? not just building architecture, but I'm talking infrastructure, human architecture. And I get this blank stare. And I say, unless you have that piece, I don't know how you're enacting your inclusivity policies, right? So this standard will help guide that. I think it provides some beautiful considerations for an organization. And I would recommend every executive team to make sure that they review that and see how well they're meeting that.
I like that. So it's not, well, our inclusivity standards are in our hearts. It's no, you need to have systems in place.
That's right.
So what I want to get into is, first of all, you are a principal work design strategist. What does that entail? And so I guess we can talk about it from a scope perspective, like what's in it. But then how do you engage with companies and what are the steps you go through in an engagement?
Thank you for that, Dart. Look, I appreciate that. I just was listening to one of your previous episodes about transformation, and the guys were talking about transformation and going into a castle and having these week of transformation learning, and you roll the dice and maybe occasionally somebody sees a 6. And that analogy resonated because I feel like I'm rolling Yahtzees all the time. And I'm just like, this is seeing 6s all the time. But you're talking about how do we help other people see that too, and all of those possibilities and bridging those gaps. And that certainly is a challenge of understanding everybody's readiness for design innovation. So as a work design strategist, I am trying to help businesses understand their design and develop design literacy, some of their capabilities and their capacity for novel work design to continue to happen in a regenerative way, so that others learns, they have some purchase, some agency, and even just doing a small project. And whether it comes from your human resource teams, whether the referral comes from your safety teams, and it's a small bite, as soon as people get involved in that process, they get excited about it. And then they want it to perpetuate. They want more to happen. So it's trying to meet people where they're at and then showing them these novel opportunities to continue to design. I would love to see organizations have a chief work design strategist at an executive level, in the C-suite level. And those are people who curate design thinking and discipline and practice, but cultivate relationships with conventional designers, whether it's user experience, service design, industrial design, architectural design. Go through the list of web designers, graphic designers, people who specialize in communication and design for usability across different domains. Go through the list. I don't see anyone really centralizing those relationships, and so that they are activated. They're a catalyst. Every single time a business wants to do something, an alert goes to that person so that they can help bring in that human-centeredness and awareness and augment, excite, improve that design experience. Does that happen for your work? Do you get to be that person?
Sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
Some of the things you said in there need unpacking, but they are the sorts of things that I'm working on doing too. And one of them is this idea that it's not enough to go in with a quick hit solution. What you really need to do is you need to go in and you need to create these systems that will continuously work on improving themselves. And those systems need to be focused on the design of work. And this is something I say when I speak, which is you don't change systems, especially self-reinforcing systems, by hitting them with a hammer. Because systems just go back to their earlier state if you try to do that. They go back to equilibrium. What you need to do is you need to introduce a competing system that can actually start to lean up against the existing system over a long time. The problem is, especially for somebody in your role, for instance, is that you go in and you're selling a paradigm shift into a self-reinforcing system that doesn't really want to see the need, I would think, in a lot of cases.
That can happen, absolutely. And it takes a long time to find what I call the alpha client, if you will, who kind of gets it, who sees it, or at least has an appetite for it, even if they don't know how to get there. I'm really fortunate, after years of feeling like this little itty-bitty bird in a nest, chirp, 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 trying to get my beak over the edge of the nest, to finally feel like I'm working with some people who are visionary, really exciting. And for example, I'm working on some projects in mining, and you might not think that mining would embrace this in such a way, but I'm working with an organization, the Earth Moving Equipment Safety Roundtable, the Immersed. And these guys volunteer their time to look at design improvements. Their focus is on mobile plant equipment, but they are systems thinkers, and they think about resilience engineering, which means, long short is, what's the business objective? Make sure that that's very clear. What are the things that underpin and prop and support that happening? And that's different from a conventional sort of safety approach. Is what are all the design factors that will continue to prop? What are the things we assume happen well, right? Don't just assume it. How can we reinforce that? And you put some energy in designing for the good things to keep happening. And then what are the things that can erode that performance? And this is where the human factors aspects come in. What are humans expected to do that prop this? What erodes that performance? And when something erodes, do we have notification? Do we have enough notice to really understand that erosion's occurring? And are there systems of detection? So each one is a design opportunity. Once the system of detection is in place, who's that information going to? Is it the right person who can make the right decision and has power to make change? So that's a design problem to solve. And then what changes will be made, and are they the right changes to make? And you continually evaluate the regulation of performance, right? So sometimes design is just about making sure the things we assume are going right keep going right. Other times it's designing to really have a revolutionary, eye-popping, wow kind of change in experience. And other times it's trying to make sure that bad shit doesn't happen. No catastrophes, no fatalities, no disablement, no injuries. That is an important objective too.
Can you give me an example of a design success using these approaches?
Absolutely. I was just thinking about different places I've been, even in the last 6 months. And the success sometimes is just about design discovery, making sure people really see what you're seeing. And sometimes the success is about another change, whether it's a product changing, an equipment changing. And sometimes the success is the way you've celebrated it and shared it among industry. So I think that work design should be recognized in all those phases. For the mining, I'll give you a few examples if you don't mind.
That'd be great.
For the mining, we've just published some animations, 17 scenarios about hazard awareness with this mobile equipment of tire handling equipment. And it was purely to bring awareness about the realities of a tire technician among industry and stimulate their angst about the need for change. And that's been published. And we're now working on interactive product viewers, which just means some bespoke technology where somebody can imagine they're climbing into the equipment and they're sitting in the cab. And all these scenarios are played out. The scenarios have been informed by subject matter experts of all the stuff that actually could go wrong, that are forgotten about. Workarounds happen, not disclosed. But these tire technicians are 10 times more likely to die than anybody else in vehicle service mining, right?
Tire technicians are people who put on and off tires on very large equipment?
Who fit, strip, and inflate tires, correct. And some of the revelations, now this sounds simple, but this is the human factors revelations in this one task, is that the task involves not just an operator in the vehicle moving this large equipment, and we're talking about massive tires that keep going in the ice, as far as the eye can see, it seems like, but that you need 2 people. And I'm not sure that the designer of this equipment ever considered that for the main task where credible failure modes can occur and people can die, fitting, stripping, and inflating tires, 2 people were involved, that somebody's on the ground spotting and they're in proximity to the vehicle, to the mobile plant, to the arms, to the grabs, because they need to help that operator see and make decisions and communicate. It's not a one-person job. The one-person job is like going out into the yard and picking up tires, but the equipment likely wasn't built for 2 people. So that's just design discovery. We haven't changed the equipment design yet, but we have designed education modules about that with a tech partner for extended reality. And now we're doing it from different points of view. So the camera angle will change. Instead of just the bird's eye view, the camera angle will change so that you'll have a bird's eye view from the person on the ground who's spotting and for the operator in the vehicle, and different learning modules arise. And that's just to stimulate more ongoing regenerative design. That's just one example.
And so one of the things you're doing as you talk through that, I'm just going to call these things out, which is that it's a combination of things I haven't seen used before, which is you're using failure modes and effects analysis.
Oh, thank you. It's the reverse FMEA. It is FMEA in reverse. Perfect.
Which I need to tell people what that is.
Okay.
Failure modes and effects analysis is a tool for predicting in advance the ways a system or a process can fail, whether or not you're going to be able to tell when it's failing, how bad it's going to be when it fails, and what you can do to prevent it. But what then you're doing is you're making that the pathway to design. And I'm painting a picture in my head. This machinery, how big are these tires?
2.5 times me, at least, We're talking massive, tons and tons of tires worth hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And as big as a car. I mean, in terms of weight, they weigh a ton. The pressure they're under is unbelievable. They roll. I mean, they're scary objects. And so I can see why that might be deadly. And so being able to go in with a bunch of experts, identify the possible failure modes, create awareness of what those could be in the organization.
Especially because of the ecosystem now. And you think about in mining, for example, these are often contracted employees or suppliers to the mine site. So they are the last Mohican. They're forgotten about. But the mine, it's the mine's name that will be on the front headlines should a fatality arise, right? But these guys call themselves the gladiators. They're often forgotten about. And the Earth Moving Equipment Safety Roundtable uses something that they call the control framework, which relies on FMEA and human factors, but in reverse to make sure they ask first what needs to go right, not just what goes wrong, right? So what underpins what's going right? So they do rely on a previous model of FMEA and flip it a little bit. That's one example. It's exciting to me to see how thrilled the folks meaning tire technicians get about being involved. So they were involved every step of the way, not just the mining managers or the equipment manufacturers, but even the guys that do the work, and especially the guys that do the work, guys and gals that do this work. And that design process is often not captured very well. The psychosocial impact, there's a lot of ISO standards about psychosocial concerns at work. In Australia, there's codes of practice about psychosocial work. And I get asked, hey, can you come help us understand psychosocial factors? Or I might come in latent and evaluate something that's already occurred and be asked, how do I make sense of this by an organization? And what I see happening a lot is very fragmented approaches to managing these aspects that come from a traditional safety vantage point and haven't had the design lens overlay. So what does that mean? That means, okay, somebody, I've had a healthcare organization ask me recently. They've said, can you help us understand psychosocial hazards in our healthcare organization statewide? And I said, sure. What particularly concerns you? What's your concern? But they haven't yet understood how to articulate their problems. So with a lot of facilitation, we understand that, well, there's some concern about occupational violence and burnout. All right, for whom? What do you mean for whom? Who's your target population? Oh, so after a lot of work teasing this out again, we find it's nursing population and at a certain facility to start with. But without articulating that problem, and nobody helping them articulate that problem, oftentimes a consultant firm will come in, and I see this many times, go through a checklist from the code of practice about psychosocial hazards and chase hazards and go find, yes, every hazard, and they rate it an orange color or a red color, but it's not contextualized. So there's no information to help springboard a design process and then look at a resolution. And so our job then is to come back and use the design lens, and we use personas and contextualize it to people. And we do research on what that a nursing experience is, and we create journey maps and empathy maps, and we start to say, okay, now we have some context about for whom are you designing and what are their real needs, and Is it legitimized? Is it substantiated in scientific literature? And what might be those task-based approaches was the human factors aspects. What's that task-based approach to make that change? And what's the job-based context? And what's the governance and the social systems and the ecosystem and the tribal culture, right? All of this that matters that will impact whether the design is going to be successful or not. I've seen success with roadwork projects as something very fundamental. It's an example I used for the last 10 years in my thesis is just a simple roadworks project where the guys had to walk backwards and roll out some bitumen paper, some tape that tapes edges of road as it's laid asphalt layers together, layer by layer by layer. And they roll backwards as 12 kilogram weighted. What is that? About 25 pounds for the US market, rolling that while walking backwards on roadworks projects where you can have mobile plant and live traffic and other pedestrian traffic. And they do that for hours on end on a road shift. And it's just the way work was always done. So it never came up on a hazard register, but with a design lens walking out and saying, what do you guys love? That appreciative inquiry. What works well? Well, they like when they're asked to include this tape, BITAC tape, because it's very profitable for the business. But at the same time, it canes your forearms, mate, is an Aussie term, which means it makes your forearms sore to roll out the tape. Somebody's collecting the tape, and it hurts your back walking backwards. Plus, they've got this risk for fatality. So we went through a design process, and the guys were involved and engaged in everything from the assessments to the ideation to telling me what was most important to them to understanding all different possibilities and getting an engineering team in. And we helped facilitate the whole new forward-facing trolley with adjustment arms, adjustable handles that we took from mountain bikes. And the guys could tape the road layers together, 64 kilometers in this example, 4 layers of road, walking forward, and they loved it. Now they could actually get low-impact physical exercise. They could walk forward. It was far more productive because one person could do the job and the other person could be allocated. They didn't lose their job. They were just allocated to other productive work. The guys would fight to play on this trolley. Everybody wanted to do it. They called other work teams excited about what they felt was their invention. You know, they owned that process. And so we're looking at these psychosocial benefits of engagement, right? Of feeling some agency and purchase and some excitement, some control over your work. So we're achieving something that might have come in from a physical domain, a task, but also meeting psychosocial benefits. And I think that integration needs to happen much, much more.
And so a couple things in there. One is that they were probably excited enough about what they had done, and they had seen the method by which they had done it, that they might do it again to solve another problem.
Sense of self-efficacy.
Yes, absolutely. And I also love that they were showing their friends. So now it starts to spread. But the second thing is that a lot of times when we talk about creating great work, we say, well, it needs to be meaningful. Meaningful is sort of like, it's not that I disagree with it, it's just vague. It's sort of like, we're going to sprinkle some fairy dust of good feelings over this stuff and everybody's going to like it. Yours was really concrete, which is people are hands-on doing something that's hurting them. It's slow. And this is the thing. It's 100% of their experience of work right then is that role of, we used to call it bitchethane, I think, butethane.
You used to do that?
I used to use it in construction, for construction. Okay. And we hated it as material. But it's so specific. It's so concrete. It's so right next to them. It's not a big, vague, company-wide thing. You're fixing their first-person experience.
And that's what we think about for human factors in ergonomics. It's a task-based approach, but it considers that entire ecosystem. You've got to understand what are we actually asking people to do, their tactics. So in those tasks, there's knowledge, skills, abilities, there's interpersonal and intrapersonal skill sets that are required, the social connections and the way we relate, but also how we regulate ourselves. There's heuristics, rule of thumb decisions that you make all the time, and I'm going to chat about that in a moment. And there's decisions, formal decisions that we must make, and also some sort of situation awareness. And all of that needs to be appreciated in a human task. So it's not just regulated to something only as in a physical domain. There's layers upon layers on this that can inform a design process. And the heuristics, the rule of thumb decisions, are often not captured well. And that's where we get, in Australia, we call it workarounds. I call it near rights. It's the variations you do to prescribed work, and you have to reconcile varieties of work. Work is done, work is imagined and prescribed or disclosed. When you reconcile that and you start to understand everybody's different workarounds that they do, the way we make adaptations, you have these aha moments, design ready aha moments there. And the focus in most organizations from a conventional view is we've got to capture all those near misses, but that's lag indicators. What are people doing to adapt their work? Because most people really want to make it more productive and efficient, and that's helps make it useful to them and meaningful and comprehensible, manageable. So what's happening with that? And those are the things I'm trying to get companies to capture. That's what a work design strategist can capture, all the workarounds. So in that bitumen task, for example, that tape that was rolled out, there were a couple of workers who put a rod, like a broomstick rod, through the lumen, through the hole, the little cylinder of that bitumen roll, and they were using that and adapting it. And so their complaint was never about back pain per se. They just wanted to be more efficient, but the goals for efficiency weren't something that were captured by the business. They didn't realize that they could have identified it as a hazard because it's the way work's been done for 20 years on this road. It's just the way it was done. Suck it up, princess, is a phrase in Australia often. I get that, by the way. And so walking around with a broomstick to me is a variation. Capture that variation. That's design readiness. What are the tasks that people are doing and how are they making variations to it? You've got a long laundry list ready to go to evaluate whether or not it could be improved, or whether, or if they're doing it wrong, maybe they don't have the education. If there's something that could kill them because they've made a variation, we got to know and help them.
You used the word lumen to describe the tube that the bitumen is wrapped around. Is that a technical term, or is it a Australian term?
I think it's Sara with a mixed background and a bit of healthcare in there.
Okay. The reason I'm probing it is because it implies to me that there's a vocabulary of design that you might have that's really quite specific. You may have borrowed it from healthcare.
Yes, absolutely. And that's true, very much so. There's a vocabulary in design. And so when I'm trying to work with design partners who are industrial design, user experience, service design, I try and use their language and speak with, like I said, the personas, the empathy maps, the journey maps. They kind of get that. When I go back to other teams, if it's financial team, I need to speak in terms of return on investment and potential, all of their KPIs that they need to achieve. The cost benefits. If it's a safety team, I need to talk about some of the hazards and risks and the potential to mitigate those hazards. If it's workforce strategy, I talk about their inclusivity plans. So you really have to keep shifting your language, don't you, for all these different departments with whom you work.
I'm going to mention one thing that your work has reminded me of from previous episodes. One is Jim Kalbach came on the show and he wrote a book on visualizing user design, basically. And one of the ones he had was a two-sided journey map, where one journey map is what the client is going through, the customer is going through, and the other one is what the employee is going through. Where are the highs and lows? And they would both have lows at the same time, because when there's an unhappy customer, there's an unhappy employee and vice versa. So, it would move in tandem. And so one of the things that struck me about that is how minute by minute it was in the experience of work. It was a task, it was a transaction, and it was very much like what you're talking about, very first person in the moment, not vague, very specific. The second thing it reminded me of is that we had Christina Maslach on the show. She designed all of the measures of burnout.
Wow, yes. I caught some of that, absolutely. Fantastic.
And I can see these things coming together, which is a journey map where you get very specific about it, and then you look very specifically at where are those moments that are really driving burnout. I can see those coming together.
You're talking about some of the temporal impact. I love how you talk about this minute by minute experience, because work designs must be agile. There's that experience that's continually changing, but there's also waterfall design strategy right at the beginning, that project management. So I've been working on trying to delineate this a little bit. So when you think about the setup of an organization, it's governance and all the systems, like we talked about resilience engineering. Do you have systems designed for your business intention and detection? Have you done your environmental design, your architectural design incredibly well, and your capital equipment? Do you understand the specifications you're putting in procurement documents? That's a little bit of waterfall preparation. Even though the resilience engineering will be used in agile work design, setting it up at the beginning is part of your early preparation. But when you do that well, the impact of that is decades, right? You have an incredibly good environmental design in healthcare, for example. A researcher I love following, Jan Golombusky, he talks about how you can mitigate psychoses through good environmental design and how you can create a salutogenic environment where things are more manageable, meaningful, and comprehensible to people, right? So you've got environmental design, you've got equipment design, your governance and your systems that can impact workers and the business objectives for decades. So we need to not forget this aspect. And then it can have both physical and psychosocial cognitive conditioning effects where people can be neurologically regulated, less stressed, less anxiety, less likelihood to convert trait anxiety into state anxiety, less risk then for burnout. If you do start there, then you have those aspects of good tool selection and good job design, understanding this well right at the output. So that has, good tool selection, good equipment might impact you for years, and the job design at least for months before people start job crafting and changing their job role the way it was intended, okay? You've got this impact at least for many months and how you do your job requirements, your staffing levels, years to months of impact. And then you've got these lead indicators of your design and operation, design and use, your agile design, your ongoing recruitment, onboarding and training, if it's done incredibly well in really useful ways, and your mentoring. It might work at least for, if not years, weeks, months, we're talking through those aspects. Your leadership strategies, well, that might just work for a day or a shift, but it must be very good. I'm talking about that point in time and that point of interaction. Your job self-crafting, your workarounds, if you can capture that, we understand what happens in a shift, great. You can have all these as part of lead indicators. There's things like toolbox talks, your daily talks, your pre-start talks, all your event records. If you're capturing that in useful ways, good. That's your hours of impact, right? User awareness, wayfinding into your design, that also might be just minute-by-minute transactions that you're talking about as people walk through a system. All the alerts, alarms, interlocks, display cameras that you have in any design strategy for equipment or environments, that's seconds and milliseconds that can make a difference. And then you've got the latent effects of your risk assessments because something bad's happened. And you're doing event analysis, and you've got to go back and have learning teams, and you've got occupational health intervention. Somebody's been injured. You've got exit and retirement strategies. These are latent. But so much effort in organizations goes to those latent efforts rather than all the early lead indicators that can impact an organization for decades or for years or for months. So this temporal consideration of work design strategy is incredibly important.
There's a book called How Buildings Learn, and it talks about shearing layers, which later on become pace layers, which is that different parts of buildings change at different paces. The land it's on doesn't hardly change at all. The foundation of the building, once it's built, it's pretty stable. The walls of the building are stable. The furniture changes more quickly. The walls change more quickly. The people change more quickly inside that. The businesses that flow through. So there's a sense that you have these pace layers that you need to be working on all of them at the appropriate time. That sounds like what you're saying.
Exactly. And that's Stuart Brand. Stuart Brand. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, Stuart Brand, who wrote how buildings learn.
Absolutely. And I fear that too often we just negate that process. I'm lucky to sit on an advisory committee and have done for years for the International Well Building Institute. And I've been involved in special project teams, the Well for Residences, and even a project team looking at airport design. And this was so exciting to me. And it might be so simple to you, but this was like an aha moment for me, like, oh, wow, I love this. Learning like the design of airports. So most airports you walk into and they're incredibly vast and big as you start to come in to check in and put your luggage in. And it's high ceilings and wide space. And as you go through closer and closer towards your gate, the ceilings and the space condenses. And it was explained to me that part of that is to help you prepare to get into a tiny little tube and fly. And psychologically, you're less likely to have this panic attack of being in a small space and anxiety around that because you've had this transition. Like, oh my gosh, how did I not get that before? I just sort of, it was just the norm and lived through my life of an airport. Does that make sense to you? Did you know this?
No, I did not know that.
What?
I did not know that. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Power of design, right? And again, it's addressing psychosocial issues.
Right. And eventually you find yourself in this long tunnel that goes into this little tube.
Small tunnel.
Right.
And so, of course, you want the human interactions to be positive with your sales team and your baggage team and all of that. But already you've had some support, emotional readiness just in the built environment.
So there's something that I've run into in the last 6 months. And it was, we had Joe Pine on the show, and he talks about the progression of economic value that's gone from goods to products, to services, to experiences. And you mentioned service design when we were talking. Has your discipline extended into experience design? And then what's beyond it, which is transformation design? That's why I was talking to people from the College of Extraordinary Experiences, is because they're working on transformational design. So I'm wondering if the discipline, I know it's gotten up through service design, is it also thinking about these sort of extensions of that into experience and transformation?
I think a few practitioners, a few researchers are doing that, but I don't think it's widespread enough. I don't think we have enough a consistent messaging, a consistent voice in human factors ergonomics to even make the linkage to design whatsoever. For me, like I said, rolling sixes, Yahtzee all the time. I keep seeing so many opportunities and I'm so excited by it. It doesn't matter which industry you put me in. In the last few months, I've gone into aviation and I've looked at flight crew and some of the tools and equipment that they work at. And I've straight away said, we had a grounded plane to work in and to look at the experiences of the flight crew. But straight away, I start thinking, wow, how could you do this in a far more efficient way? Can you use extended reality? Can you have experiences where we could all just join into this meeting and be in a digital twin environment with analytics happening? Who have been your design influences that can help you think about design continually? We've been in aged care and healthcare organizations. I've been in the mining. I've been in road transportation. I'm thinking the last few months alone. I've been in production and manufacturing plants for compressed gas, right? And all of it excites me. It's like Mr. Rogers, A Day in the Neighborhood, and how we can learn from one industry and bring those learnings into other industry are really important. And that, to me, helps us always think about potentials and transformation.
Can you say a little bit more about a word that you said in passing, salutogenesis?
Oh, absolutely. So in healthcare and in work and business, that conventional model might be pathogenic. So it's about trying to understand disease states, things that don't go right, things that are very wrong, right? But a focus on salutogenesis is back to that principle of what goes right, what continues to go right, what can we underpin to go right. Salutogenesis is the birth, salutogenesis, the birth, saluto of good things. And I love the idea, and it arose from war times when you're looking at who could survive in Jewish camps, who would still find meaning in their life, who would find comprehensible ways of and manageable ways of living. right? Is it meaningful? Is it manageable? Is it comprehensible? And that was important. And I think we can learn from that in terms of healthcare, and we can learn in terms of work and work design. And it's a flip. You've talked about flipping your HR strategies. The flip in work design, we often have organizational frameworks saying work exists, and then we've got all these pathways to look at injury and risk. And to me, that's like, okay, we're going to be on some childhood playground and you're jumping onto a slide. Sit down, buckle up, it's all downhill from here. Whoo, right? What's that say for us? But when we think of salutogenesis, which is Antonovsky is the original philosopher on this, when you think about salutogenesis, it's like, hang on, there's a climbing gym where you continually move upward. You can continually construct good health. You can help make good things happen. You can help regenerate good design. So design can be healthful. We might socialize. We might learn something. We might get physically conditioned. We might emotionally grow. We might experience positive psychosocial phenomenon if work is designed properly. I don't want people to just go home in the same state. I want them to go home in a better state if we have well-designed work.
It's a big idea. It's a really big idea. I mean, I would imagine that the origin of salutogenesis was what's in people that makes them survive. But then beyond that, it became what is in the systems that helps things get better.
What are the triggers so that populations of people can thrive rather than just, I think you're right. It's what was in a person, health, stress, and coping.
What's the net positive movement?
It goes back to this. It's like Aaron Antonovsky aspect of making sure that work has a positive effect. So when you think about it in sustainability, for example, the design of a chair, have you made sure that the chair and all of its components were designed to give back more to the environment than it took? So did you use recyclability materials? There's a Smart Ocean chair, for example, from Human Scale, where they've used ocean nets and pulled out pollutants and recycled this, and everything from the adhesives, etc., were designed to make sure that they gave back to the environment, and the construction process was designed so well that it gave back more than it took. So similarly, that net positive consideration in work design, are we constructing health? Are we building people up? And we know that work already is constructive of health because populations of workers have a better health profile than non-workers. There's a constructive social movement to design for health, but work already is starting from a good platform. The children of workers have a better health profile than non-workers, the children of non-workers. We know that some of the lead indicators, even behavioral aspects like nutrition, is better among workers versus non-workers.
That could be because there's something about the people who are not getting work that is the root cause. But I recently read that people who retire are at a much higher risk of mortality than people who don't. And so people who are at 60 who retire are at much greater risk than people who keep working. And it's like 50% higher mortality.
So significant. So you were asking about sort of causation versus correlation, right? So I think what you're saying is beyond correlation, there's some causation that work can provide meaning and structure and coherence in life, but we don't want to stuff it up. We want to make sure that it's designed well, that it continually reinforces all the good things that can happen at work. We don't want to mess it up. We don't want to harm people psychologically. We don't want to kill them, of course. And we want to help mobilize a workforce so that they can achieve things that are of value to them. And organizations often have other values like sustainability and social welfare and challenging disparity. And Human Nations talk about that in their 17 sustainability goals. And so work can be used as a vehicle for this. It can certainly be used. And one of the criticisms I get from human-centered design, Dart, and help me, you might get this also, is about, it's almost assuming as though it's designing for a human experience is like designing for selfish humans. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute. I don't see it the same way. I don't see it in competition of sustainability goals. I think it just means really smart design of understanding once humans do exist in a system, we can design to optimize their experience, their performance, and also design to prompt behaviors that will support what we want to achieve. So you can design poorly and have too many enticements where bad behaviors might ensue, knowing that humans are capable of some bad behaviors, or you can design to mitigate, having constraints and affordances and whatever that is, so that people will likely behave well and meet your goals, sustainability being one, socialization, helping vulnerable populations.
Sometimes the resistance I get is the idea that if you try to design work that people like, that what they're going to want is leisure. And the truth is, in all of my research, what I find, it's people don't want leisure. They do want work that is not extractive, which is the opposite of salutogenic, which is what you were talking about. They don't want work that is crushing. But more than anything, they want the kind of work they love. And that doesn't have to be easy. It can be incredibly hard. But if it's the kind of work they love, then it's not less work.
And that's great. I ask people, what's your joy work, right? What's your work and what's your joy work? And is that balance just right? And most people accept that sometimes they've got work or something that's a little bit burdensome. And that's part of the responsibilities of work, but they feel like they have an underpinning right to very good work. And they get offended when that's infringed upon, when they don't have enough of their joy work. So I'm often asking, that's an opening line question for me. What's your joy work? What's your work? Is the balance right? Right? Part 2. And then you hear all kinds of things, but then you can translate that to organizations.
You know what I've been asking people lately? It's a really fun question. What's your favorite tool at work? And it's so interesting to hear people talk about it. I ask everybody, so I asked my barber. And she said, these scissors right here, this is the only piece of equipment in this entire place that I actually bought myself because I love this. You see this? How your finger fits right in there and your thumb fits right in there. And it's just the right size. She just went on and on about the quality of that particular tool. Very important part of her work for her was having that thing. So one last thing before we get into the closing questions. The ISO guidelines, the 7 principles of a human-centered organization, and maybe we'll pick one of these that we want to go into. 1, it capitalizes on individual differences as an organizational strength. 2, make usability and accessibility strategic business objectives. 3, adopt a total system approach. I want to go back to that one because I want to know what that one means, and because it's also hard. Ensure health, safety, and well-being are business priorities. Value personnel and create meaningful work. 6, be open and trustworthy. 7, act in a socially responsible way. The 2 of these that are hardest, and I'm so surprised by 6. I'm so surprised by be open and trustworthy. That doesn't sound like an ISO guideline to me at all.
No, it doesn't. Right.
What do they mean when they say adopt a total system approach?
Well, when we talk about a system, it's when you're understanding of multiple things working together, right? Like a mechanism where they have a shared objective. So understanding all of the parts that are going to move forward, get you there. And I think, as we said, there's a lot of fragmentation that happens. A lot of business units that are not working cohesively in organizations, and understanding right back to the essence of what's your core strategic objective. That's why I believe very strongly the work design strategist can do that, can help KPIs be realized by many different teams. So, for example, back to a mining example, I went out to a mine in Weipa, Rio Tinto Weipa, and they had an excellent participatory ergonomics program happening. They won Mine Health Safety Awards, I think in 2016, because they worked together to redesign tasks so that they were more accessible to different workers. So they reduced risk, you might say, for manual tasks and for hand injuries, but they made the task more accessible. So my role was to go out and evaluate the program and where they were at. And the opportunities were such that they could translate what was happening in the work design. So very briefly, they had 6 business units, and they had the goal of redesigning 5 tasks per annum. And that meant they needed to identify maybe 60 tasks could be identified, and 30 seemed reasonable to make a change within their purview. And 15 of those got assessed, and 12 of those had some off-the-shelf, easy solutions, and the rest needed some longer engineering solutions. And go through that winnowed funnel, and 5 of these tasks had to be changed in that year. That was their objective. That was their lead indicator. We don't care how you do it. Make sure it addresses manual tasks and some hand injuries. And they did it. Each business unit hit their target of 5 each year, every year for 6 years. And they markedly reduced all of their lag indicators, all of their lost time injury frequency rates, and their common law claims, and musculoskeletal disorder and hand injury rates decreased. But they believed more in the process. They didn't know where they were going to go. And through that, we connected the system by saying, can you now talk to your workforce strategy and say, for every task you've reduced that manual task load and exertion, you've made the task more accessible. Therefore, they should be able to be engaged and count that as part of their key performance indicators. And that means they've now designed for diversity and enacted their inclusivity plan. Let them count that same task. Let's go back to productivity, because all of these tasks were always more productive, return on investment, cost benefit. Let's make sure that your finance teams get to count this. Your operations teams get to count this. We made it more efficient. Let's make sure that other business units could recognize, maybe they improved a procurement system. Each team, there was something where there could be an overlap, and let's unify that. And so look far more at that system, that impact that's being made. It's a complex whole. And when we're too fragmented and take on too many different projects, random projects, they sort of die when the person leaves. If it's not embedded in that work system, these things don't have the buoyancy. They don't sustain very well. So trying to embed it where one task can count across and people can just like celebrate the success and everybody gets excited and works together so much better. To me, that's a really concrete way to do the systems thinking.
I had a good example of that recently, which is that we were looking at data defects across a very large, complex system that went through many departments. And when we actually looked at how all the data flowed from one end of the business to the other, what we realized is that almost everybody was having issues with one upstream process that they had no control over. So all of the downstream issues, we could stop working on those. Everybody was working on mitigations to the downstream processes. And we could stop working on those if we just fixed the upstream process. So let's bend all of our attention toward that and the prevention. It's the sort of thing where if you weren't thinking about it end to end, you simply couldn't fix it. You wouldn't allocate your resources right.
And that's the things that absolutely that can impact on decades, years, months, days versus just the latent effects thereafter, right?
I have a couple questions I usually ask at the end, but I'm going to ask one of your questions first. What's your fun work and what's your work? Your joy work?
My joy work. Oh my gosh. I'm so, lucky because I have so much joy work. My joy work is literally, like I said, going into an airplane and learning about what flight crew do, and then going into a mine and seeing how tires are changed, learning how bread bags are made, learning how compressed gas works. It's like always a day of fun. What happens to the banking work experience? I just love learning about how the world ticks. So that's my joy work. It's just the very essence of what I do and being able to go into different industries. And I do research and I do teaching at universities and consulting, right? So the 3 realms gives me that empirical evidence of going to see how work's really done, but also some of the research basis. So that's all fun. I'm very, very fortunate because I understand people don't always have that balance of a lot of joy work. And the challenge work is obviously all the report writing, translating it and trying to find the language to make that just right for everybody. And I can learn a lot from conventional designers about how to get the messaging across in simple ways, in good storytelling, I think. Certainly a challenge.
Now I'm going to ask my question, and it's adjacent to that question, and we'll see how the answers compare, which is, what job do you hire your job to do for you?
I would love if my job could help translate the importance, the value proposition of work design in organizations. I would love, before I leave this earth, for there to be more demand for work design strategists in an organization. So it's got to understand the importance of it and plant it so that I really see regenerative design. I would love if I could use somebody like me, if I could hire a human-centered design strategist is to work out how to really convey the importance, translate the messaging, storytell, and see that regenerate in other businesses. I'm always on the fringe, Dart. I want to be in demand, not just in the fringe. I'm that little bird still chirping at the edge of the nest.
That's I hire my job to change the world.
Oh, there you go. That's right.
And it's not perfectly designed for that yet. That's absolutely the struggle. It's also one of the things where if you ask of a product that it do something like take you to Mars, it's going to be hard to find that product. So what's great is you love the minute to minute of your job. You love that. But the design of it for doing the bigger thing, which is changing the world, that's still a struggle.
We need to send more people to that castle to learn about transformative design, and they can be inspired that design is even possible for them.
And what does your job or your work cost you?
I work a lot. So I invest a lot of time in work, and it's because I'm so excited by it and because I'm always solving problems. It can cost me sleep. I walk around and I've got a new idea whirring in my mind, and I can be 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, formulating these ideas. And it's like a compulsion. I can't stop until I write it down somewhere and start to test out ideas with somebody. It can cost me, time that I have to constantly balance and understand with family and nature. I think anything that you love so much can become a little bit of an obsession. So you have to set your own boundaries around that, because equally, I love also restorative health. I love restoration. I love play. I love nature. Of course, I love my sport. I love my yoga. So I have to continually design for my own health and my micro-social systems. It can cost me some of that.
Where can people learn more about you?
Absolutely. So you can learn more about me through Viva Health at Work. Viva Health Group is the website, Viva Health at Work. I'm teaching and researching with 5 universities, and also a podcast called WhyWork, which is how we got connected, Dart.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio, for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.